The thing that I've been seeing a lot of people in New York, that are outdoors still wearing masks, ostensibly believe that this is somehow helpful. And I have looked at the literature around masks, especially outdoors. There isn't a huge benefit, to put it nicely. There's this sort of, I forget who said this, but there's this idea that it's very difficult to convince people that they've been fooled. It's easier to fool them than to convince them that they've been fooled or that they had it wrong, and that they, especially when they were kind of enthusiastically participating in something. That's me kind of embellishing the quote a little bit. And I find this deeply concerning because I've seen footage of people in front of City Hall here in New York, basically singing songs about how everyone should be masked at this point because they're afraid. I guess something happened there, and they feel strongly enough that they believe everyone needs to be masked, and they feel threatened. As we're kind of finishing up here and thinking about how to move forward as a society, it feels like there were some things that were really broken here, and I don't know how to fix them at this point.
I think that's true because something so unnatural was done to us. We're a social species, and human contact was impeded. Our most sacred human rights were interfered with. Our communication was curtailed. Our basic human rights were curtailed. Yes, we've changed. I mean, on the masks, no, there is no good evidence in favour of using masks to stop a virus, an airborne virus, especially not cloth and surgical masks. Yes, if you were an FFP3 or an N95 and it's fitted and you use it hygienically, the idea of toddlers in a preschool wearing masks is just ludicrous. But they weren't really about stopping transmission. They were signals. They were signals of danger. When you wear a mask, you're a walking billboard for danger. There's an epidemic, be careful. They have also now over time become imbued with the symbolism of morality and virtue. Good people wear masks, good people of a certain class and a certain mentality, good people who put others first. Now there's a reason why we were told that your mask protects others. And that's not because it does protect others. It's because that the behavioural scientists know that appeals to helping others work better than appeals for your own safety. So, there are numerous interviews in my book that talk about how masks were signals and symbols. Some people, however, will need a soft landing. They're not going to rip their mask off and be immediately comfortable with that because they're like a comfort blanket. They're a crutch. They are now the vesture of the faithful. It's made me wonder, did every item of religious garb start in a moment of madness at some point? Why do we wear any of the things we do? I'm afraid I think of masks as being like religious garments. They offer a sense of protection, but no actual protection really. So they're really about the symbolism that's imbued with them. They sacralize virtue.
We live in an era of censorship and disinformation, and it can be really hard to know what's true and what's false in this information climate. To get honest information and insights you can trust, join us on Epoch TV. You can sign up for your 14-day free trial at ept.ms/free trial Jan. That's ept.ms/free trial JAN. What do you think at this point, Laura, is the best way forward? Let's talk about this specific area that you focused on. You're suggesting, serious inquiries into the use of this. I imagine there will be serious calls for the same in the US, even though, there isn't as much information about what behavioral techniques specifically were used here, at least not that I've seen at this point.
Interesting that there isn't so far. Well, I mean, people should have a look at the World Health Organization and Cass Sunstein, who heads up the WHO Behavioral Insights team, and I think is still connected with the US government, do some digging around. But I don't think there will be serious calls for inquiry into the behavioral science approach, not unless people clamour for it, because the thing is that behavioral science is incredibly useful to governments. It avoids the awkward debate, the persuasion that's needed. It avoids enacting legislation. You just nudge people subtly into doing what you want. I think it's a very cheap and reasonably effective and quite sneaky way to get people to do what they want. So I don't think that serious inquiries will be met with a serious acceptance in government. I have already written a letter to the Public Administration Constitutional Affairs Committee in the Westminster government, who will not be holding an inquiry for now into behavioural science. I imagine it will form part of the general inquiry into COVID, because there is now a very wide acceptance that the fear-mongering was off the scale. And I like to think that my book helped move a dial. I think really citizens have to take action. You know, you have to write to your representative and ask them about it. We have to push back on governments that are doing it. So that's one thing. I think every citizen has power. We have to remember that we invest governments with authority. I think we need to show a lot of empathy to each other. It's very easy for people who don't like masks to be frustrated with those who do, and vice versa. They've become symbols of the tribe you belong to. You know, the Covidiot versus the moral person, or the clever person who never fell for the conspiracy theory versus the masked sheep. You know, whatever way you want to look around, it's become very divisive. But ultimately, we all have to find peaceable agreement with each other. And like I said, that, you know, as the pandemic comes to an end, some people will need a soft landing. It'll take them time to take their mask off and revert back to normal life, because some people have been left somewhat terrorized. A psychologist coined a term called COVID anxiety syndrome, and has identified that 20% of people are hanging on to obsessive hygiene measures and watching the news and are not ready to live normal life again. So I think we need to be tolerant.
Well, I'm going to read this headline from the Daily Mail. Did flawed PCR tests convince us COVID was worse than it really was? Britain's entire response was based on results, but one scientist says they should have been axed a year ago. So, you know, I happen to have seen in a string on Twitter of all sorts of responses of people in the UK just happened to be to this particular headline. One person was suggesting this is like now nudge in the opposite direction, right? It's very, very interesting, right? Because obviously this messaging is very different from the bulk of the messaging over the last however many years. What do you think?
Okay, so I mean, one theory that I saw is that the big testing labs will have had contracts with the government that would have seen them through to a certain period of time, and so therefore the testing continued because it's like a commercial obligation. You know, the sunk cost fallacy, you've paid for it, might as well use it. I do absolutely think there's some reverse nudge going on, and this isn't the first time we've seen it here in the UK. I, along with others, raised questions about the validity of the PCR test to determine infectiousness, and of course anybody that raised concerns was derided or censored for it one way or another a year ago. Something I tried to interrogate back in January 21 was the hospitalisation data, because I had an inside source at NHS and I was looking at the data, and it was clear that the big number, you know, how many people have been hospitalised each day, actually comprised people who went to hospital with COVID symptoms and with COVID. They're the true hospitalisation number, okay? But it also comprised people who went to hospital for something completely different, had a routine test and were found to have COVID. Now, it's important to know about them because you have to house them properly in the hospital. You don't want other people catching COVID from them. But that's not what the figure was for. The hospitalisation figure was to make you realise lots of people were going to hospital. It wasn't about managing wards. And thirdly, it comprised people who acquired COVID in hospital. So we were given one number that included three very different subsets. And I mean, I went back and forth with the NHS so many times to try to get this information. And this wasn't information that they wanted to share and dissect and provide at a granular level. But just recently, there's been a lot more talk about how the hospitalisation figure does include these different subsets, and you can be hospitalised with, not just hospitalised from. And so the reason that we're getting this little chipping away at what the data means is to reverse people out of the fear. Because once you've frightened people, your only tools left are to, you know, really shockingly change the narrative into a whole new story, or to just reverse them out, which in a way though is a bit sneaky because it's a bit gaslighting. Oh, did you think those numbers were big and serious? Oh no, sorry, they included this. Didn't you realise? But you know, all that fear they created at the time when they were talking about the big numbers was real.